This is now the second week of Advent, and our Advent wreath has some colors in it that I didn't talk about last week. The color blue is very prominent. Blue is the color of the sky, very hopeful color. It's also often thought of as the color for Mary. If you see her in paintings, Mary often wears a blue robe or a blue head covering, and so it's often thought of for her. It's a dark blue that we use in the Advent time, also reminding us of the darkness in the world before the light of Christ comes. Now the first two candles are blue, and so I'm going to light them now. And remember that Advent is all about getting ready for the coming of Christ. We first of all think about his coming as a baby into the world to live his life and die on the cross and rise again for our salvation. And we also in Advent think about Jesus' second coming, which will be to take us home to heaven. During this Advent season in Sunday school, we have been talking about the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. God's people, the Jews, were taken away from their own country, and for 70 years they lived as captives in another land. But God opened the way for them to come back to Judea to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, starting with the temple. And that temple had to be rebuilt in order for Jesus to come back to do his work. So God was preparing all this time for Christ's coming, just as we are now thinking of preparing for his coming at Christmas time and his return at the end of time. Let's watch this story.
After 70 years in captivity, God made it possible for his people to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. Zerubbabel and Jeshua were in charge of the rebuilding project, but the people who were living in Judea before the Jews returned did not want the temple rebuilt. Those people worshipped idols. At first they offered to help, but Zerubbabel and Jeshua knew that they worshipped idols. They said, "You have no part with us in building a temple for our God, the God of Israel." This made the other people angry. They tried to stop the Jews from building the temple. They bullied and threatened them. So the work on the temple stopped for 16 years. Instead, the Jews built expensive houses for themselves. King Cyrus of Persia died, and King Darius was made king after him. During this time, the prophets Haggai and Zechariah urged the Jews to continue rebuilding the temple. Zerubbabel and Jeshua got the builders back to work again. Their enemies demanded to know who gave them permission to work on the temple. They even sent a letter to King Darius reporting the names of the people who were building the temple. The Jews kept on building and sent their own letter to King Darius. They told him that King Cyrus had given them permission to rebuild. King Darius searched the records to see what King Cyrus had decreed. They found out that King Cyrus had given the Jews permission to build. King Darius sent an order back to Judea telling the officials there not to stop those who were building the temple. Instead, he wanted the people living there to pay for it through their taxes and sacrifices. When this ruling was announced, the enemies of the Jews had no choice but to obey. The work continued without any more problems. 6 years after Darius became king, the temple was finished. The Jews gathered there for a special opening ceremony. It was a happy occasion. Priests were appointed to lead the worship services, and there was great joy as Ezra read from the book of the law.
I wonder if you remember what it was like when Asbury was remodeled or rebuilt only a few years ago. That was before I came here, so I don't remember it, but I've heard stories told of how the whole building was worked on to become a more beautiful building as it is now. You probably remember the workers working in different parts of the church that you couldn't go into at that time. I've seen things like that too, because the church that I came from had a building project, and I know it takes a long time. Now, thankfully, today's building projects don't take as long as it took for the temple to be rebuilt. And this building that they rebuilt was improved on again later when Herod became the ruler of the area and made it into a much bigger temple. And all that had to happen before Jesus could come as the sacrifice to save us from our sins. So God was preparing the way all along. Well, I hope you have a wonderful Advent week.